Hi, sweet souls. This is Krista Xiomara, host of I'm Awake Now What podcast, welcoming you to week 5 of my summer series. I'm super excited to pop into this week because this is probably my favorite subject to talk about. Get ready to share my screen here, which is awakening. Like we're literally on the home stretch of starting to wake up and yeah, we're on the home stretch. I'm super excited about this. So just a quick rundown on the housekeeping items. So we're in week 5. We've got 3 more weeks to go, and then season 6 starts. Woohoo! And next week we'll be talking about finding your truth, and week 7 we'll talk about building some really good support systems, and then week 8 culminates with us coming home to ourselves. I definitely can't wait to talk about that, but I'm super pumped about this week. And then just a quick reminder about what are we doing here. So the podcast summer series, the purpose and intention is to provide a safe space for you, the listener, and the viewer to explore, create, and release belief systems. And the mission and vision for this summer season is to usher in a global expansion of our communities through open dialogue, spirituality, reflection, inner healing, and self-love. And as always, there's a quick disclaimer for anybody participating or engaging in this 8-week series, in that there is a possibility for you becoming triggered. We are talking about sensitive subjects. Religious trauma is a very hard thing to sort of get into. So just real quick, all individuals engaging in and or participating in any portion of this course are encouraged to seek professional help and any other supplemental mental assistance they may require. The topics covered in this course are sensitive and there is a possibility of becoming triggered. I'm Awake Now What podcast is not responsible for any trauma incurred while completing this course, and mental health resources are provided after each weekly course and available on all platforms wherever this is distributed. And the rundown of how we will spend this 1 hour together is I've curated a topic. There'll be storytelling, reflections and journaling, reading recommendations, correspondence via corresponding podcast episodes, and additional resources. And you can email me your thoughts and questions, anything else that you want to share with us. Oh, awakening. Yes. So excited to talk about this. So excited. Week 5. So my inspired quotes this week, our first one is from Albert Schweitzer. He was a theologian and philosopher and a very interesting person if you ever want to go and check him out. This quote is so fitting for this week. It holds so much truth and so much mystery in it. And so I had to open up with this one, which is the path of awakening is not about becoming who you are. Rather, it is about unbecoming who you are not. And I don't think truer words have been spoken. And lots of people have taken an iteration of this quote and made it into their own words. But this one, good. All right, so my next one is from the sweet, lovely Baba Ram Dass, who is no longer with us. He was such a beautiful soul and left this earth with so many gifts and treasures in the form of his books and his teachings and his life. And oh my God, if you're looking for somebody to learn and grow from, pick up one of his books today. They'll definitely help you out. So in this quote, he talks about, I would like my life to be a statement of love and compassion, and where it isn't, that's where my work lies. And little teaser, we'll talk about why that's important in this awakening process, and I'm super excited to just dig right in. So I've structured this week of awakening, we're going to sort of recover questioning, then we're going to talk about softening, tolerance, oneness, knowing, and then awakening itself. Sorry, my dog is barking very diligently. She is on it. She's making sure no one's trying to get through this house, and I appreciate it. So I wanted to cover something that, again, like the structure of each one of these episodes is purposely meant to build on each other and correspond to each other and help you reference back where you are in the process as much as you can. The questioning is something that happens throughout the entirety of a human life. And what I wanted to bring back to light in this week's episode related to awakening is to try to, like, wherever you're listening to this podcast episode, you're definitely already on the path of awakening if you're listening to this podcast episode. So thank you for honoring whatever your internal guidance system said and led you to this moment. But what I want to say is that there's those initial thoughts of doubt, of questioning, that they're kind of like the light that break through the crack of the education, the indoctrination, the brainwashing, the standardization, the controlled behaviors, like whatever your religious experience is, those initial thoughts that you have with the questioning, they're the light. They're the light that allow you to break into an awakening, and it's really important. And so I think it all happens to us in varying degrees and in different ways. And so as we get into the journal prompts, I want you to go back and think about those initial thoughts of questioning that you had. And the next one is this break in old thoughts. And like for my experience, it was true that like at one point I realized that the teachings that I was being taught, the behaviors, the way of being, all of those things didn't resonate with me anymore. And I started to like turn and pivot, and like it was kind of like an inch a little bit this way and an inch a little bit that way. And that break in my old thoughts was also a primer for my awakening. It was like, a quiet rebellion that happens inside of yourself, that you're just like, this doesn't feel completely right to me. So how can I challenge this breaking of old thoughts? And I mentioned in walking away that I walked away in 4 areas. Like it started out mentally, then it was like physically, and then it was emotionally and psychologically, and then like one day I was just bounced and I never came back, right? And in the middle and in between the lines of all of those times, time points in my walking away, was these breaks in the old thoughts and the questioning and the light coming through and saying like, there might be a better way for me to exist in this world. There might be a better way for me to engage with the world. There might be a better way for me to honor my own truth of what I feel is right. Because again, in my religious experience, the reason the questioning ever started was because there was this inability to reconcile, like, here's the life that Christ led, and you should lead your life this way, but also you have to hate all these other people because they don't believe in you and everything else, right? Then there was like the abortion clinic stuff and the female submission piece of it and all of those things. Those are the breaks that I'm talking about, like the break in like, I don't know if I want to be a woman who doesn't have her own dignity of her own opinions, her own thoughts, her own mind, her own life, that has agency over her life. Like those were the little breaks. So I want you to think about what those are. And then to circle back on the questioning also, to this idea of critical thinking and questioning is so important on this path, because as you walk away And as you start to try new things, you still have to be cautious. You still have to start thinking for yourself. And you have to really dig deep inside yourself to find what resonates, what feels true to you, what speaks to the core of who you are as a human being, not identified by anything your family says you are, your church says you are, you know, sales and marketing says you are. Like, this ability to go on this path, you can't do it without critical thinking. You can't do it without questioning. And you have to give yourself room to start questioning. You have to give yourself room to critically think, and you have to give yourself like the patience and space to question and critically think too. It's so important. And like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, you know, I was really nervous about joining any other organization once I went on this path, because I was very scarred from my religious experience and feeling like I don't know who I can trust with this journey, and maybe I just have to trust myself. And I trusted myself by myself for a really long time. But then again, when we talk about going on this journey, and I said it a couple weeks ago and I'll say it again now, is that part of being in this world and being human is staying connected. So we do require each other. We require each other's wisdom. We require each other's shared experience. So think about finding that equanimity when you're critically thinking and questioning, and giving yourself the space to vacillate between isolation and connection, isolation and connection. Give yourself room to like ingest all of your new thoughts, your new people that you're meeting or places that you're going, and then give yourself time and space to ingest everything, and then do that debit and credit that we talked about. Like, does this feel right? Is it in alignment with who I am as a human being? Are my current core values in any way being compromised? So, and then, yeah, I just want to talk about that. I don't want to drone on about critical thinking and questioning because we have a lot to cover, but I did want to just encourage you again to know that like critical thinking and questioning for the rest of your life, no matter how awakened you become. And then the introduction of new thoughts, right? Allowing new thoughts to sort of hit your consciousness, new ideas, new experiences, and being able to question those from like a very loving and kind place is really important in your process of awakening. So again, I don't want to like beat the hammer on questioning, but I did want to raise it again because as you awaken, inevitably more questions come up, but then there's also like the questions and the experience that you're having and vacillating again from those two places of like isolation and connection, you know, solidifying your truth and coming out and testing that theory in the world. Like, going back and forth to those places is real and necessary and part of this journey. So be gentle with yourself and give yourself enough space to question. Okay, so I kind of feel like I love this little topic here. Softening. I actually didn't realize that's what was happening during my journey. It was kind of like after the fact. Is Baba Ram Dass, I'm sorry, not Baba Ram Dass, but our first gentleman in the quotes, Albert, when he talks about unbecoming, you know, when I gave the example and the analogy of the puzzle piece, right? Like our families put us together and we're this thing. And part of our spiritual journey is putting the puzzle pieces in the right order for ourselves. And that process is called unbecoming. So we're raised in these family units and by society as something, and our external variables, people, influence say, Krista Xiomara, you are this thing, and you have to stay as this thing. And here are the things that you're supposed to believe. Here are the people you're supposed to love. Here's how you're supposed to present in the world. Here's how you're supposed to contribute. Here's when you should speak up, and here's where you cannot. Um, so there's all that. And as you're awakening and you're looking at those puzzle pieces of all those categories I just called out, right? You start to realize, like, oh no, I actually don't want to present in the world like that. I actually, don't believe that to be true. And my lived experience is something very different from that. And I can't honor what you're saying and what is your belief because I believe something different. And neither of us is good, bad, or different. It just is, right? So this unbecoming, this unraveling also leads to a softening I found in my journey. And I'll be curious to hear from you guys if wherever you are on the spectrum of awakening, if this is true for you. Like, unlearning, unbecoming inevitably made me softer to the world around me. It made me softer and less, it made me less rigid. It made me less rigid about my world. It made me less rigid the way I think. And I know I mentioned in the previous episodes, living in extremes was a real thing. And so living in extremes meant I was very rigid and I saw everything as black and white. And now I see life as a spectrum. And before I announce my thoughts on anything, I try to see both sides and everything in between, and really come from a centered, grounded place of knowing, of deep knowing within myself, checking in with myself if what I'm about to say feels right. Because what I've learned is we're constantly changing too. And if you go on this journey, you become more malleable, you become more flexible, you are open to more things than you probably ever would have been. In a religious experience, you're very constrained and you're very controlled, and there's not a lot of wiggle room for things. So there's the softening that happens with your unbecoming, and it's really, really beautiful. So expect that on your journey. So the other thing is that I kind of just mentioned it right now with the opinions and the ideas, is that those all start to instead of being square, hard edges, they start to sort of get that rounded edge that you see sometimes in in a little square with the rounded edges, because you start to think there's nothing more humbling than saying I just don't know, but I'm willing to suspend my judgment or my opinion on whatever it is you're trying to convey to me, or whatever I'm learning if you're reading a book, and then letting that information hit you, and then forming your idea slowly, and taking more information in, and all of that things. That's also softening, and that happens to a lot of people on our awakening, and it leads to something really beautiful in the next slide, which we'll talk about. And one thing that I noticed too is that in this journey of awakening, there's also this softening to those that are different from you, because you go on this journey of awakening and spiritual expansion and coming out of your religious experience. And because there is this otherness that is taught in religious life, and there's a suspicion of others and a judgment of others, that once you come out to the other side and you've endured, sometimes in my instance, you've endured the backlash of people not understanding your journey or questioning why you're leaving because it brings something back to them. Again, I'm speaking in general terms because I don't want to relive the whole podcast episodes that I've said, but for instance, my family was very upset and they didn't understand me leaving, and so they verbally attacked me for things. That's what I'm talking about. Coming to that point and just realizing oh, this is what it feels like to be on the other side. And so the softening that happens is there's this empathetic softening that happens to you for everyone around you, because then you interact with people who don't believe in God, don't believe in spirituality, are super spiritual, are super religious, like any variety of people. And instead of coming from that place of otherness that has probably been ingrained in you in your religious experience, you begin to soften and accept who they are as they are without wanting to change them or wanting to like inject your opinion into their lives. And that's another beautiful softening that happens on this awakening, because it allows for us to connect on a human level. It allows us to find a common ground where we can just be with each other without influencing each other. And that's like amazing. Like, don't you wish that every conversation and every interaction you could have, you could meet that person on their base soul human level without the opinions or judgments they have, and just see you as an equal and as a soul and as somebody just there to share in this experience of life and connection together. Like, how beautiful would that be? And in the spiritual community, you get that a lot. I mean, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. You find these people who have softened because they're now on the other side, and instead of picking apart what's different about others, we embrace it. And that's beautiful. And I love that part of it. And one thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm certainly not an expert on the ego because I'm not a trained therapist or psychologist, but one thing I will say is that your ego goes like on a wild ride through spirituality and awakening. And it's like a roller coaster, I would say. And I've had lots of people come to the podcast to talk about this. So Betty's talked about it. Stefanos has talked about it. Kate Bears Cochran has talked about it. Billy Lee Myers Jr. has talked about it. Sonia's talked about it. Listen to all those episodes. But there's this like, we're in our modern society, we're taught from an early age to react from our ego. And again, I will point you back to Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. He does a whole chapter on the ego that's incredible and really calls attention to where the ego starts. And then in our religious communities, like, our egos are tied to our identities. And so whenever our identities come into question, that creates this like tension and this break, and sometimes a feeling of like fear and disorientation, especially if someone gets pulled out of an experience that they're identified with, or you leave at the same time. But on this journey, what I've found is that your ego, it does soften, and it starts to take a back seat, and the core of who you are, that universal you, starts to rise to the top and starts to drive the vehicle that is you, in your decision making, in your thinking, in your ability to connect with others, to make good decisions, to trust your internal guidance system or intuition. And this is a beautiful psychological process that happens in awakening. If you decide after your religious experience that you still want to grow and learn and expand in a way that is outside of an organized religion, and you can do all those things. And so I did want to just hit on the ego thing. I don't feel comfortable saying too much about the ego, because again, there's lots of schools of thoughts of it. There's lots of people who call it different things and say that it manifests in different ways. And I have my own understanding of what the ego is and how it's presented. And so I just encourage you to dip into some more work, because in the spiritual awakening, there is so much that's happening psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally to you, that it's good for you to have like a base understanding of the inner workings of just your mind as a human being. That's super, super helpful. If you can understand like literally the parts of our brain, and how we mature over time. And, like, I often say that part of my spiritual growth was dependent on my maturity, and it I didn't know this at the time because I was too young and too, like, you know, just in it. But for me, you know, all the hindsight that you receive over and over in your journey, and you look back every year, every 6 months, you realize how much you're evolving as a human with or without a religious or a spiritual experience. And as we get older into our 30s, you know, like our literal frontal lobe is getting stronger and more discerning, and we're able to make, you know, more well thought out decisions and things like that. And you know, I'm not going to skip over the fact that that's part of it too. So again, like I've read tons of psychology books, and I wouldn't have known that unless I had. So just remember too, there's if you can read books and, or, you know, watch YouTube videos, or whatever type of learner you are, on the psychology of the mind, you'll really get a better understanding of the process that's actually happening to you internally, with your ego, your subconscious, your conscious. All of those things are super important, but unless you understand the basis in which they're all you know, founded on, it's hard for you to kind of make that like mind body connection. So do that, guys. All right, next one, tolerance. Oh my God, I love tolerance. Love me some tolerance now. What I want to say about this, I've said it several times on the podcast episode, and I love empathy too, because empathy is just one of those things that, like, you'll be living your life just going along, you know, thinking that you're an empathetic person, and then you go through something like really hard or really tumultuous, and then you realize, like, oh, I had no idea how hard that could have been. And then you have such deep, beautiful empathy for people who've gone through that, right? And I kind of feel like empathy and tolerance are like cousins, you know. Um, in my journey, I have mentioned being on the other side, right, where your family is mad at you, you know, the people in your religious community don't understand. And what I learned is that in the beginning, I kept cultivating this like tolerance within myself as I was softening, as my ego was softening, as I was understanding like the bigger universal truths of what we were doing here. And I realized that at some point I kept going back to like my family units and my old friends, and I wasn't being met with kindness, and I wasn't being met with tolerance, and I wasn't being met with like the benefit of the doubt. It was always like go straight into like saying something negative, or, you know, fighting with me about something. And it dawned on me, I think probably like 2 years into my spiritual journey, was realizing, oh, okay, so tolerance is not something that you often experience. It's something that you give. And so I learned in that process that I had to give more tolerance to the people around me that were in return, I was expecting them to be tolerant of me because I was growing my tolerance. And then I realized, well, the kindest thing that I can do right now is to allow them, you know, the dignity of their process, allow them the dignity of their beliefs, and allow them to feel whatever they have to feel. And you sometimes have to extend that kindness and that tolerance out to others. Excuse me. In the beginning, a lot more than you actually receive it back. And that's just a good practice, I think. It's a good practice to remove expectations. It's a good practice to practice that non-rigid communication and ideas, and having that compassion for other people, and realizing like it's okay that they're not giving me the kind of tolerance and acceptance that I need right now, but I'm going to tolerate and accept them in this moment, because that's the kindest thing I can do right now. So tolerance for yourself in your process is super big. Tolerance for others, super big too. And then one of the things is that when you have tolerance for your past and your present, is that sometimes I think as human beings, like when we have clarity, which you get a lot of clarity, the more time that goes on, the more mature you become, the longer you are in your spiritual journey, you could become frustrated with like the version of your, older self and your new self, and, you know, feel frustrated that you didn't know better back then. And so you have to like remove that judgment, and you have to be, uber tolerant of yourself, because like I know that every single person, whether they're awakening or not, spiritual or not, is we're literally becoming new iterations of ourselves, like every year. And I think biologically they say it happens every 7 years, like all of our cells get swapped out and all of that. So we're birthing ourselves over and over. We're birthing our ideas, we're birthing our core values all the time, we're birthing new versions of ourselves, and we have to be tolerant of the change that happens, and we have to be gentle with ourselves, and compassionate when we're looking back. And I say that with the knowledge that I did that too, like in between my journey of from where I am today and where I used to be. I always used to be like, why couldn't I know better? Why didn't I do better? Like, oh, and I'd beat myself up, and that's not the purpose of going on this journey. And you can't heal your religious trauma, your religious wounding, and awaken and liberate yourself at the same time if you're beating yourself up. So be gentle with yourself, be gentle and kind with yourself. And I know this is kind of obvious, but this tolerance of like doing no harm was really important to me too, because I didn't realize that in in having tolerance for people, like even if they lash out on you, or you feel like you want to strike out for a conversation or something that happened between you and somebody who doesn't understand what you're going through, is that always keeping in mind that like when we harm others, like we harm ourselves ultimately. And so it's important that like in embedding your own tolerance, as a practice, tolerance is a spiritual practice. Like it is 100%. And all of us right now during our political system, we could use a little bit more of that because we're so divided. But I know for me, there were times when I wanted to lash back out, and sometimes I did. And ultimately, it always comes back. Like if you're somebody on this journey of awakening and expansion, you're doing a lot of self-reflection. You're having a lot of growth, which means you're probably looking at each one of your interactions and your time with other people, and you're trying to learn from your behavior. You're trying to learn from your past mistakes. And so if you do lash back out at somebody, like the pain and the guilt that you can feel internally for doing that, is harming yourself, and you don't want to beat yourself up for that. And then just like really beautiful kindness to people if you can. It's really hard sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, to be super kind to people, but what I've learned on this journey too is that most people are not being kind to themselves, and that if you can offer them a moment of respite, of kindness and tolerance, those are twins, I would say, tolerance and kindness. Well, triplets maybe. Tolerance, acceptance, and kindness might be triplets. Accepting people as they are, being tolerant of others, and being kind, even if they're unkind or grumpy or, whatever the case. That's a spiritual practice. That's a part of awakening. And you'll find yourself as you grow and mature into your awakening that like kindness is the chosen action in your day-to-day life. And that you don't have to come from a place of like, either harming people or reacting to people. You just let people be. And most of the time, people are living in the world just thinking about themselves, projecting from their own internal thoughts. They're not actually looking out into the world and thinking about others and thinking like, oh, even though I'm going through this, I might try to be a bit, more tamed in my interactions with people. Like, most people are walking around very numb to what's happening without being conscientious and kind to others. So kindness, tolerance, acceptance, like as a spiritual practice, are huge. Okay, so this next one is oneness. Excuse me. I feel like in the journey of awakening, there was this like universal theme that kept coming back, and people in my journey, wherever I went, I started out at the yogic ashram, then I went, into Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Sufism, went atheist for a hot minute, and even the atheists, have to say like we're all connected. So if we're all one of the beautiful things about oneness and awakening is that you see others as yourself regardless of their belief systems. And that's kind of like, the tolerance is the foundation of that. And then the practical application is that you're seeing everybody as themselves. And I say this, and I know that it sounds similar to Christianity. And of course, there's, do unto others as you will have done unto yourself. And that resonates true in Catholicism and Christianity and things like that. But what I want to come back to and say that the difference here is that living it, as opposed to like, this is the scripture, but then we're still going to tell you who to hate, tell you how to hate yourself, and tell you how to recognize otherness in others. That actually, cancels out the do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. And so when you have this like spiritual awakening and you're on your journey and you're not in the confines of religious doctrine or organization, you truly can see, honestly, like for the first time, it's like seeing for the first time. You really, truly, truly understand, like our energy is connected to everybody, our lives are connected, and we have so much personal power and agency and influence in our little worlds around us and the bigger world. And that deep knowing that like we're all connected, it's cliche, but it's so true. And it's something that you will find over and over again as a theme, as a pointer to you, to bring you back to like, yes, you're on this earth doing your own work, but your work transcends your ancestors and your descendants. Like anytime we do our work, we're changing ourselves, but we're changing generations too. So like that might be a really big concept to think about right now, but I won't go into any more detail about that, but just think about that for a second. Like if your family has been Catholic for like 5 generations and there's this, underbelly of judgment in your family, and you decide that you can't live that way anymore, and that you want to be more accepting and tolerant of people, and that you would like to stop judging yourself. So you're stopping the ancestral judgment going to the back, and then you're stopping any forward moving descendant judgment on that. And that's like a beautiful thing to do. That's how we're all connected. That's how it ripples into like the vast collection of humanity, and like what you do right now matters. The thoughts that you have, the positive energy you want to send out, wanting to understand your experience in a way that makes sense to you so that you can greet the world from a more healed and healthy space, that moves mountains. So I want you to to know that this idea of oneness will come to you over and over and over again in your journey of awakening, because it is a universal truth. You do find it in every religious text, especially texts that predates Christianity, and that we all need each other, and we all belong to each other, and we're all just walking each other home. Okay, awakening. So I what I like to say is, like, I've said this on the podcast a couple times, that my pet peeve is when people say like they're woke, because one, it's past tense. Two, they're using it in the wrong grammatical sense. But awakening is literally for the rest of your life, because again, we're growing and changing and maturing and evolving. And I want you guys to get really comfortable with the idea of awakening the rest of your life. And your awakening is like this beautiful, mysterious uncovering and discovery that is happening over and over and over again. Like, I'm still learning stuff. I'm still awakening and learning. I'm still finding the places where my ego is still stuck, or where I need additional healing. And that healing keeps me stuck. So then I've got to go revisit the issue that's keeping me stuck, and see like, what's my part in it? What's my other person's part in it? Am I allowed to receive healing from this person? And if I'm not, how can I create my own internal healing? And then I go through that process over and over again. And inevitably, it's this like continuous cycle that happens. And that is not meant to scare you or to make you feel exhausted about the process of awakening. It's just that, like, think about the process of awakening as like, it's like every day you're literally waking up, and every day is another opportunity to really understand something new about yourself and about the world. And I mentioned earlier too, it is like seeing for the first time. One of the podcast episodes that I did with Stefano Stefandos, I have two of them, but it's his first one. Go back and listen to this episode, because it's really good. And he talks about how when he started waking up, and it happens to all of us, honestly, like, you do start, like, the world just starts to make more sense. You feel more connected to like nature and the people around you, and it's this beautiful place to live. And like I said, like, when I started waking up, I was like, the sound of music, Julie Andrews lady, and I just like wanted to scream it from the rooftops, like, you know, everybody awaken, like, don't be a sleepwalker. This is the most beautiful experience. And in my episode with Steph, he talks about how, like, he got really egoic and impatient and arrogant. You can sometimes get arrogant in your awakening. So just remember that, like, life will bring you experiences multiple times, and you're gonna have to keep learning and growing. It's the rest of your life, but it's also this, like, seeing your love for the first time over and over again. It's beautiful. And awakening for me definitely has brought me moments of bliss and contentment and fulfillment, happiness and joy and peace. And it's in the practice of all the things we've talked about up until this time, which is, you know, in that continuous loop, right? It's like questioning, you know, healing, journaling, reflecting, creating practices that support what you feel as is your own internal truth. You know, like, what are your words? Like, what are the words that describe your own awakening? You know, for me, it's definitely tolerance, acceptance, compassion, patience, kindness. Like, those words come out of my mouth constantly, because those are the daily practices I have to have to maintain my awakening, and to be open to the fact that, like, I'm changing and growing, and there might be things I'm still hell-bent on holding on to. But in between all of that, there's these unexpected moments of beautiful bliss. And I went on this journey. I thought you know, initially there were two things I wanted. I wanted happiness and I wanted truth and equanimity. The happiness piece I found out is fleeting, but what's better than happiness is contentment. And I learned that through my Buddhist practices and my Buddhist teachings and my Buddhist books and my Buddhist teachers and everybody that is that practices the tenets of Buddhism, the Dalai Lama, is that contentment is, I mean, honestly, is the best thing that you could have because you've removed those expectations. It's like a stasis of state that you stay in a constant state where you're just content and at peace with everything that is. And your contentment allows you the joy of like anything that comes your way that's like good and you know, all on the positive spectrum of things, and then also all of the negative stuff and the, you know, the trauma that finds us eventually with other life experiences. You can still be at a level and state of contentment no matter what, and that is priceless. My contentment is priceless to me. I will take my contentment over my happiness that comes and goes any day of the week. And same with my sadness, but like I return to this like stasis of contentment, you know, where I'm just like grateful to be alive and it's enough. And everything else is bonus. Like imagine living from that place. It's pretty rad. The truth and equanimity was when I left my Catholic upbringing, I kept thinking like, well, what do I believe? Like, what is my truth? What do I know? And that truth found me. And because I was in the Catholic Church and it was very much living in extremes, that I needed to find balance. And I literally tattooed, you can see equilibrium on my arm, like I think a year after I left the Catholic Church, because I really wanted to understand with my whole heart, my mind, and my body what it means to live in equanimity and equilibrium, because we're pushed constantly to these extremes and you can't live in those extremes without becoming overexhausted in whatever you're doing and then swinging yourself to the other pendulum and being, you know, in a state of doing kind of like nothing or the complete opposite. Like there is a middle way, and the Buddha talks about the middle way. And when I first heard that, I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I wanted to find. I needed to find a middle way, and the middle way, you know, propagates itself out into everything. And so those two things were really big on the beginning of my journey, and kind of like were my guiding principles to figure out what I wanted. And awakening is like this beautiful thing too, where you can actually start to recognize it in other people, and even people who aren't spiritual or religious. I have this brother-in-law who's really super calm, and he's not religious, and so I always call him, you know, Zen so-and-so, not to his face and not to my sister, but because my sister's still super religious. But there's something masterful about his internal Zenness that I recognize. And it doesn't have to be called out, and it doesn't have to be elevated by any stretch. But even in his own life, although we're not on the same path, I can see that he's elevated himself some way in his own life, that he's come to this point of Zen where he's just like, you know, like a flat lake, just still and calm and beautiful. And what's great about recognizing awakening in others is that I really truly feel that when you go on this journey, that the right people start to find you. And you also need to find those people who are further along than you, and then people that aren't, so that you can bring the other ones along with you, and that you can, lean on the wise elders for that continuous loop and feedback, and ask questions of them, ask them how they've done what they've done, tell them to share with you their stories, their life experiences, and honor that awakening that just lives there within them that you can learn from. And the other thing that is really beautiful is the midwifery of awakening, is what I like to call it. Is I really truly feel that, like, as you're midwifing and birthing your own awakening, and you start to find people on this path, you end up being able to birth other people's awakening, and it's in these quiet small moments when you have conversations with each other. I have, let's see, like right now off the top of my head, I'm thinking about Sonia, I'm thinking about Alicia, I have these, and Lena, I have these beautiful small moments where I get to talk to these people who are also awakening and spiritual and on the path, and we learn from each other, and there's an exchange of information, and there's an exchange of spiritual experience and reflection and checking in. And a lot of times we're like healing, being healed, and the healer all at once. I think Lena actually put this quote on her Enlightened account. You'll have to go check it out. And it's true, like you can be anywhere on, you can have any of those roles at any given time or at the same time with your friends. And you're in this collective experience of birthing your awakening, and it's this beautiful experience you get to have on a regular basis with people when you're on this path of awakening. So if you experience that, or even if you're having that now, you could be having that now in this episode and in the 5 episodes before this, or when you hear somebody on the podcast say something that's like really true and resonant to you, you're just like, yes, that feels right to me. That's a literal awakening. It's the light bulb, and the truth seeps through you, and you're just like, oh, I get that. The other thing is finding yourself. Super byproduct. It's not really a super byproduct. It's like a big byproduct. I'm gonna do a whole episode on it. But finding yourself in this awakening is so beautiful. That unbecoming, that unlearning, that unraveling, the rearranging of puzzle pieces. You find yourself, your true self, the true you that was born without blemish, whole, beautiful, loved, celebrated human being. Like, you find that person on the other side of this, and it's so wonderful. And I mean, it's worth all the work, because it is work to go on this journey. And then your internal work that you do is a gift to the world. And in the spiritual community, you see this in real life and in real action, as there's these beautiful souls in the world trying to, again, midwife other people's awakening, or midwife their healing, or midwife their liberation. We all seem to find something that is unique to us because of our life experience that calls us to do that same work for other people. And that's why your internal work becomes a gift to the world. Then you can go out and recreate that healing for others. If, like, in real time, this moment, from my own experience, like, I had never put all my thoughts together from leaving my religious experience and coming out of it and being on the other side until this moment, and realizing, like, this is where my real work starts and continues to echo into the world. And when I started the podcast, it's called I'm Awake, Now What? And it's called that because as you start to wake up, you're like, well, now what? What do I do next? you know, and this, hopefully this 8-week summer series is like a good treasure map for you to figure out, you know, what is your next step? Where do you go in the process once you start to manifest the healing and start to solidify your ideas about your own internal truth and what you believe? And then you start to discover, like, what is your internal work teaching you? What is your internal work pointing you towards? It's really beautiful, guys. I really think that we're coming to a place of a society as organized religion becomes less of a thing and people return to the roots of themselves, that there's this beautiful shift and awakening that is happening in us, for all of us, that is undeniable. Okay, so let me see. All right, so I want to give you guys some really quick reflections and journal prompts for week 5. And so this is what I've come up with. Like, please take some time. And again, pause the podcast. I said a lot of things. I didn't stop too much on this one to highlight for you guys anything in particular, or to do like a midpoint reflections. So your homework for this week will be like to reflect and journal prompt the following things. Like, can you feel yourself changing? Can you feel yourself softening? What are some old beliefs and thoughts you've let go of? How would you define awakening? How has awakening manifested for you? This is a really good question. And then what do you hope to understand about your own life journey? And then the deeper questions I think we all have to ask ourselves as we go on this journey, because sometimes it can feel like you're bumping around. So I wanted to hit you at the end here with a little bit of the heavy hitters. Is, why do you think you're here on earth? And then what is the meaning of your life? And Swami Radha, who I adore and love, that was my first Swami when I got out of the Catholic Church, made this distinction, is that sometimes it can feel overwhelming if we fathom too long, like, what is the meaning of life? Because we can't. There's just no way. We can't know right now all of it. But what we can know and discern and guide and direct is the meaning of our lives. So I want you to think about that this week, like, and ask yourself, what is the meaning of my life? No one else's, not your mom's, not your dad's, not your sister's, not the world's, nobody else's but yours. Like, what is the meaning of your life? And then the last question I wanted to leave for you guys is, what truth can you recognize that is universal? So for me, I'm just going to give you some ideas here, like some truths that I found on my journey through multiple religions and life experiences and spiritual experiences, is that 1, we're all connected. 2, love is the most important thing that you can do on this earth, to love each other, to be loved, to give love, to receive love. 3, that gratitude is a truly transformational daily practice to have, and that life is alchemy. Number 4, that when we have life experiences, good or bad, they're teaching us something, and in that teaching is the opportunity for us to transform it into something new for ourselves and for others. And so we come out the other side transformed and transmuted by that experience. And then the other, one other universal truth I would like to say would be, that I think there is nothing more sacred than the stillness that you can have at the quiet. If you can quiet your mind, there is true gold in those moments. And again, don't be intimidated by meditating. You can, walk around nature and try to be quiet. You can exercise and try to be quiet. But if you can find that a momentary break from your internal dialogue can be extremely powerful, extremely healing, and really beneficial to your growth and your expansion. Because like Eckhart Tolle says, that the moment you recognize there's somebody observing the silence, like that's a mind-blowing, but also directs you into something very deep and amazing about this human experience. And who is that that's observing? He constantly says, who's the observer? All right, so our books for this week, guys, is On Being by Jen Pastiloff, Dark Side of the Light Chasers, Debbie Ford. Okay, a little bit of psychology and ego work on that book. Lamb, which has a longer name, it's like Christ's childhood friend, Biff. Christopher Moore, love this book so much. If you've left Christianity and you need a good laugh about your experience, go read this book. And honestly, I kind of secretly wish that this is what happened in Jesus's time, that he did go to all these places. The Four Agreements is also a great way to start to distill down in a really simplified way how to live and breathe and react to the world around you as you're changing and growing, and what 4 agreements you can make within yourself. So that's all I'll say about that book. Transcending the Ego by Eckhart Tolle is a talk on Audible, so please check that one out. It's really, really good. He talks specifically about like your ego. He calls out how he lost his ego. It's really beautiful. And then Journey of Awakening by Ram Dass, The Power of Attention by Wayne Dyer, Awakening the Buddha Within from Lama Surya Das, and then again The Power of Now, which I think I've had on a couple weeks. And then for this week's recommended podcast episodes from I'm Awake Now What podcast is just listen to every episode, because my first question or my second question for every single guest that comes on to the show is to have them walk me through their childhood experience within religious or spiritual or non-spiritual experiences, and then fast forward as to where they are, what they practice now, what they believe. So you literally get to hear everybody's awakening story in every single episode, and it will just give you a lot of like community. It'll give you a lot of things to think about. It'll give you a lot of great reference points. And so go listen to every episode. Tooting my own horn over here. So guys, that is the end of the awakening episode. It's so beautiful to awaken. It's so amazing. It happens for the rest of your life. Enjoy your awakening, the beginning parts of it, because you get catapulted out of the air, the proverbial air, and you start to grow and change, and things just start to move quickly once you start awakening. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful process. And I wish you all well on this awakening process. And I feel like this, week 5 is our turn around the corner, right? Because we were talking about really heavy stuff, dealing with the old garbage that we had to changing, and dealing with your family and needing internal healing. And now it's like we've been in a dark tunnel, and now the light's coming on, and it's like, what's out there? And so we're turning a corner, and it's only getting better from this episode out. And I hope that you experience that on your own journey. And I so appreciate you guys being here with me and letting me talk your ear off for an hour. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Thank you for all the countries that are listening. This week I found out that Yemen is on our list. So many countries. We've got Denmark, England, Yemen, the Philippines, Japan, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Uruguay. We have Iceland, Australia, did I say New Zealand already? The US, Canada, We've even got a handful of African nations that are listening that I'm blanking on. Um, People in Russia are listening. I mean, honestly, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for trusting me with your spiritual journey. Thank you for listening to all of my guests. Thank you for following the podcast on Instagram. And thank you for letting me be in your life in this way. I'm so grateful. I don't take any moment I do the show for granted. I truly, truly love doing this with you guys, and I love being a part of your lives. And I wish you well. I'll see you guys next week.